Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by Next Gen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm Justine Reichman, your host. Today with me is Michael Fox, CEO and co-founder of Fable Food Company. Welcome, Michael. How are you all the way from Australia?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Justine. Thanks so much for having me along. It's a real honor to speak to you on the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased we were able to connect. I know that there's different time zones, different times of days, and it can be challenging. So I am so pleased that we are able to coordinate.
Same.
And for those of you not familiar with Fable, just to kick this podcast off, and for those watching the video cast, Michael, would you give us a little intro into what Fable is?
Yeah, so our mission is to help end industrial animal agriculture, and we do that by making delicious meaty food out of mushrooms. So we take farmed mushrooms like shiitake mushrooms, white button, portobello mushrooms, and we turn them into really delicious meaty food, and we sell that mostly through restaurants and food service, and a little bit in retail.
Wonderful. So I got to ask, your goal, your mission is around agriculture. What got you inspired to solve this problem specifically in agriculture?
Yeah, so I went vegetarian 7 years ago. For me, a mix of, and actually in order, ethical, environmental, health, and pandemic prevention reasons. And I went vegan about 2 years ago for all those same reasons. And so I finished up I was doing a fashion business for about 10 years, which I finished up with about 4 years ago. So I took some time off after that, was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I got very passionate about the idea of wanting to help end industrial animal agriculture for all those ethical, environmental, health, pandemic prevention reasons. And I was thinking through how I could best go about doing that. And I've been one of those annoying vegans trying to convince everyone around me to turn vegan. And I think in 7 years, I've managed to convince 3 people to work for Fable, which probably doesn't really count. And the third I caught up with the other day, and he's back eating meat. So I'm obviously a pretty terrible activist, but I could see out of all those conversations, people get the reasons why, and they do want to reduce their meat consumption. It's just hard because meat from animals does taste great. And, I didn't go vegan because I didn't like the taste of meat. Quite the opposite. It was hard to give up because of that. So I sort of started realizing out of all those conversations, if you can give people the taste and texture of meat and make it out of something other than animals, that's the best route to helping end industrial animal agriculture. And I know you had Bruce Friedrich on from the Good Food Institute on the podcast in November, and he articulates very well all of the background on this. So I that was kind of the sort of goal of what I wanted to work on and help achieve. And then I was thinking through how I could best go about making something that helps people reduce their meat consumption.
Well, that was my next question. Why mushrooms?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a pretty healthy eater. I live on the Sunshine Coast. My wife and I live on 41 acres, and we grow a lot of our own food and bake sourdough, brew kombucha, and got a big veggie garden, and try to sort of learning about regenerative agriculture and trying to apply some of those principles on our property. And so I eat a very minimally processed whole food based diet. And so I wanted to develop a meat alternative that aligned with that diet.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask you, because I ask everybody this when they use the term regenerative agriculture. And I ask this because I've heard so many different definitions. And since you threw it out there, I have to ask, what does regenerative agriculture mean to you?
Oh, good question. And I guess I've seen all the different definitions too. And I suppose I'm trying to figure that out as well. I think to me, the things that draw me to it anyway, with growing food at home is I want to grow food for our family that is really nutritious. So ideally grown in very healthy biodynamic soil, is obviously organic, no fertilizers, chemical fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides or anything used. That's probably the primary goal from a health perspective. And then in doing that, ideally also regenerating the soil on the property so that, we're a caretaker, we might own the property, but I'll hopefully live for another 50 or 60 years, but we'll pass the property over to other people in the future and hopefully leave it in a more healthy state than we found it.
I appreciate you taking a moment to just humor me and go through that.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. And it's a really interesting space to learn because, like you say, there's all sorts of different definitions of it. But that's, I guess, that's how I think about it.
Well, and it's pretty personal to you too, because it's
Yeah,
your family, it's your food, it's how you're feeding your family, and it's how you're taking from your soil. And so you're really creating a regenerative farm, if you will, for your family to eat from.
yeah, exactly.
You're providing, you're living a regenerative life.
Yeah. And I guess I also want to learn about it too, because we're to apply into the Fable business. Obviously the growing the vegetables and fruits and regenerative farming on the property is a sort of side hobby. The Fable is the core place I'm spending my time and where I guess I'm having hoping to have the biggest impact. So yeah, learning about these regenerative processes, we can hopefully apply some of that into our sourcing of mushrooms and different things. So that's been really interesting to learn about as well.
Yeah, so do you apply regenerative agriculture to the sourcing of the mushrooms and how you produce the products?
Yeah, so mushrooms to start with are an amazing part of any regenerative agricultural cycle. So we use shiitake mushrooms as our primary ingredient, and shiitake mushrooms are in nature, they grow on rotting wood. So tree falls down, mushrooms growing on the tree. Sometimes there's lots of different mushrooms that will do that, but shiitakes are one of them. And when they're farmed, they're grown on sawdust and sort of man-made logs that are made out of offcuts from the timber industry. So yeah, the timber industry has a whole bunch of wood offcuts and sawdust that they need to sort of dispose of. It's a byproduct of the timber industry. So shiitake farms basically take all of those offcuts, compress them into logs, and then grow the shiitake mushrooms on those logs. And aside from using a waste stream from another industry, the other big benefit is when the shiitake mycelium grows through the logs, it helps to break down the wood and turns it into really good compost that then is sent to farms. So all the shiitake farms then have partnerships with other sort of plant farms that'll then go and take the spent shiitake logs and compost them onto their farms. So that's not specifically us. That's just shiitake mushrooms as a whole. That's what's done in the industry, and it's similar with most other types of mushrooms. They grow on byproducts from other industries. So really good as part of an overall regenerative agricultural cycle.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell us what kind of products are you providing us with?
Yeah, so going back to what got me into mushrooms and then leading into that. So yeah, I'm a very healthy eater. I wanted to develop an alternative to meat, but make it out of really natural, healthy, whole food ingredients. So I didn't want to use sort of textured vegetable protein or binders like methylcellulose or other things that are sometimes used for meat alternatives. I wanted to make something really natural, whole food and healthy. So I started exploring different base ingredients. Some chefs put me onto the idea of using mushrooms as a base ingredient because mushrooms have a lot of those natural meaty umami flavors in them, and they're incredibly healthy and good for us. So I started exploring mushrooms. Through that exploration, met my two co-founders. So Jim Fuller grew up in Texas, fine dining chef for the first 12 years of his career, studied chemical engineering because he wanted to understand the science behind food. He fell in love with mushrooms as an ingredient, left chefing, moved to Northern California, got a job on a mushroom farm, went down the rabbit hole on mushrooms, fell in love with everything about mushrooms. He also fell in love with an Australian woman, moved to Melbourne, went back to college, and he studied agricultural science, majoring in mycology, which is mushroom science. And Jim's worked as a mycologist around Australia and Asia for the last decade. And then our third co-founder, Chris McLaughlin, is an organic mushroom farmer and a really strong background in organic mushroom farming. So yeah, we teamed up to co-found Fable to make alternatives to meat out of mushrooms. So the kinds of products that we make are basically products that you can use to replace animal meat in your diet. So our first and our primary product is a pulled meat style product, and it's made from shredded shiitake mushrooms. So we take the shiitake mushrooms, we have some unique ways of cooking them that we've developed using Jim's mycology science, chemical engineering science, and chefing background. So we cook them in really unique ways, which amplify the meaty umami flavors and de-emphasize some of the more kind of traditional sulfuric mushroom flavors. And then we shred them, and so you get a really delicious, like pulled beef, pulled pork style taste and texture out of the product. But it's made primarily from shiitake mushrooms, and then short list of other all natural plant-based ingredients, a little bit of coconut oil and some natural flavors.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to try it.
Yeah, I hope you can soon.
So are you, tell me about this. Tell me about your experience as a founder. Is this your first time as a founder?
First time in the food space. I previously did a fashion tech startup called Shoes of Prey that I co-founded in 2008, and I did that business for about 10 years prior to doing this one. So I've done a startup, been a founder and done a startup before, raised capital, hired teams, all those kinds of things. But that was, I guess, when I started Shoes of Prey, I was sort of 24, 25. I wasn't really thinking about the mission, good for the world type side of things. Whereas Fable for me is much more of I sort of came at it from a what can I do to help the sort of the purpose side that you talk about a lot on the podcast. What can I do to help improve the world and make it a better place? And kind of came at the business idea starting at that angle.
More impact driven.
Exactly. Yeah.
More impact driven. So this was a new kind of way for you. It came from a different place this time exactly. As a founder. Do you think that was just a new place in your life that you were at?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, when I started Shoes of Prey, that was, 2008, 2009. I think my awareness has grown dramatically in that time of issues like climate change and sort of the loss of topsoil and all the issues around industrial animal agriculture. I was only sort of vaguely conscious of those things prior to 2008. So yeah, when I started Shoes of Prey. So yeah, when I finished up with Shoes of Prey, had all those kinds of issues front of mind and wanted to do something for my second business that could help solve those problems.
I think it's a partly experience and what's going on around us, right? And what touches
exactly.
us.
Yeah.
Right. And then of course, what's important to us. So from what I'm hearing from you, going vegan and changing the way you eat really played into, from what I'm hearing, that food, was changing the way you were living because of the impact you wanted to have on the world.
Yeah, exactly.
So you married what was important to you with the impact you were already having on a personal level and created your startup.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there's a framework called the Ikigai framework, which I only became aware of after I'd started Fable, but it perfectly kind of describes what my thinking was in the lead into Fable. So you kind of want to, ideally, the thing that you work on is a mixture of what you're good at, what the world needs, and something that you can make a viable living from. And for me, Fable marries up on all of those things. I was already vegetarian for 3 years before starting Fable, so the mission side and what I could see would be good for the world was all aligned. I'd been a founder before, so starting another business was my skill set. And the making alternatives to meat, you could see that that's a way to solve this problem in the world whilst also building a business.
And it feels good, right?
It feels great. Yeah. Much more enjoyable than doing women's shoes, which is what my last business was.
I gotta say, I do like women's shoes. But it doesn't have the same impact.
No. I enjoyed it too. But
you could have a company like Rothy's.
Yeah,
right?
Rothy's are great. Yeah.
Rothy's is great. They're impact driven. They're doing positive things in the world, and they're making shoes.
Yeah, and our model with Shoes of Prey was manufacturing on demand, so it was designed to reduce a lot of the waste in the supply chain. But yeah, still we were marketing fashion to consumers, which is designed to make people buy stuff that they don't really need.
So I'm curious, you went from fashion to food, right? You can do eco fashion, by the way, right? And then reusable fashion, and that's a whole thing too. Refashion, they call that.
Yeah,
refashion thing.
It's
But
just
anyway, I
taste.
digress. That's all different. That's a whole
That's
different
another
podcast.
podcast.
That's another podcast.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask you was, as a second-time founder, first-time you were a founder in fashion, now you're a founder in food. I'm wondering what things do you see when you go from founding a fashion company to founding a food company that you can utilize? What skills can you take with you, and what skills did you have to then acquire? And
I'd say.
going in, did you feel like, oh, I can do this, I founded one company, I can do another? Or did you think, okay, this is a totally different industry? Where was your head at?
Yeah, I'd say most of the skills or things that I learned from Shoes of Prey apply into Fable, and the real only differences are around learning about food. And obviously there's a lot to learn about food and the food industry itself, but all of the other pieces around, develop consumer research and consumer insights to understand what consumer wants, what consumers want, product development, and the processes there for shoes and for food are, not dissimilar the way you go about understanding consumer insights and doing product development. Then manufacturing, shoes and food, obviously different manufacturing processes, but working with contract manufacturers or building your own manufacturing facilities, a lot of that's the same, even though it's a different product. Then raising funding, hiring and managing teams, building a good culture, all of those pieces, marketing, sales, all of those pieces are really the same across industries, or at least for me, the same in fashion as they were in food. But then it's been learning a lot about more the technical side of the product. So learning a lot more about mushrooms, about nutrition. And, I had a really strong interest in those areas beforehand, but really getting into the detail of it. And then obviously food safety is probably the other really big one. It's difficult you'd have to do something very wrong to kill someone with a pair of shoes, but in the food space, you've really got to be conscious of having all of your I's dotted and T's crossed on food safety, and allergen management, those kinds of things. So yeah, I'd say it's like 80% overlap on the skills, and 20% or so has been different, all associated just with the product and food industry.
In your fashion company, were you a solo founder, or did you also have partners?
Also had two co-founders in that business,
Awesome.
so that's been similar too. Yeah.
That's been similar too. Yeah, I was just curious because, oftentimes we go from one company to another, and I'm curious because you've done it and, you've gone from one industry to the next. What was the biggest thing that was different from the two companies, or the greatest learning that you had from one that you took to the next?
Yeah, I'd say I'll give you a couple. So definitely doing something that I'm passionate about and really deeply passionate about, and that is good for the world, is a massive plus for just my own personal motivation and enjoyment. Shoes of Prey, I don't wear women's shoes, and I do really enjoyed the fashion industry, but I didn't necessarily love it in the same way that I love food. And we weren't necessarily doing something as good for the world as what we're doing now. So picking a business or a business concept, pursuing a business concept that is impact driven for me has been massively motivating, and I've really enjoyed that. Probably my other biggest learning out of Shoes of Prey was, so for that business, we kind of did the full roller coaster ride of a startup. We kind of ended up in total raising about $25 million US. At our peak, we had about 200 employees. We built our own shoe factory in China. We were sort of doing about 10 million a year in revenue, but we just couldn't get mass market product market fit. We'd done really well in these niches of really passionate creative consumers, and extended sizes and wedding shoes, but we couldn't get scaled product market fit in the mass market. And we kind of bet the company on that we would be able to achieve that scaled product market fit. And so in the end, we didn't get the outcome in the business that we'd aimed for, and we sort of ended up selling off the assets of the business and weren't able to return all the money to investors that had been invested. So wasn't the outcome we were looking for. So my big learning out of that into Fable is to really focus on consumer insights, ensuring that we've got product market fit in some mass market segments before we go and build out scaling the business. And I think in the In the meat alternative space, I think one of the things we've seen over the last few years is a lot of companies have raised huge amounts of capital, and I don't think most of them really have scaled mass market product market fit yet. And so I think a lot of what's going on in the category, the meat alternative category at the moment, is the same things. People are making the same mistakes that I made in my last business. So I totally empathize with them. But the approach that we've taken with Fable is keeping the business really small and lean. Focus. We're only 17 full-time employees. We're pretty close to profitability. We've had a few P&L profitable months. We've raised venture capital and just closing another round now, which we'll announce shortly. But doing it in a really efficient way and making sure that we deeply understand the consumer. We deeply understand where we've got product market fit before we go and build out our sort of fixed cost base and employee base, and before we start really scaling the business in a big way.
Are there any recommendations you would say for new startups that are looking for product market fit that they might not think to look for, that you've learned is really important to consider?
Yeah, good question. So probably the biggest error I made in Shoes of Prey was, and this was difficult to do in Shoes of Prey, so it's not necessarily, it wasn't easily solvable, but being able to watch consumer behavior, in my experience, being able to watch consumer behavior versus doing consumer surveys and asking consumers what they want is so much more valuable. The problem that we had in Shoes of Prey was no one had built an online customizer for women's fashion shoes, so we couldn't go and watch how mass market consumers behaved. And so we did surveys, we did focus groups, we asked consumers what they wanted, and the mass market fashion consumer, she'll tell you that she wants to design her own shoes and that she loves the concept of that. But deep down, she doesn't actually really want to do that. She wants to see what's popular in fashion magazines and on Instagram and buy that exact design and even from a designer. So what you ask a mass market fashion consumer, what they tell you, is very different to what they'll do in their behavior. And we made the mistake of just going off the focus groups and the surveys and all these consumers were super excited about wanting to design their own shoes. So we went and built that, scaled it out, but in the end, they didn't actually want to design their own shoes. So with Fable, I spent a lot of time watching consumer behavior, like standing in the grocery stores, watching consumers shopping the meat alternative shelves, seeing what products they're picking up, which ones they're putting back on the shelf and not buying, which ones they are buying, and then creepily going up to them afterwards and asking why they picked that product or didn't pick those other products, and having a conversation with them about it after I've watched their behavior. And that's worked much, much better for us. And it's also what helped lead me into the path of mushrooms and doing a really healthy, whole food, all natural product.
What was the comment that you got that you were sort of most, that maybe you didn't think you were going to get, sort of something that was, you get a lot of comments, right? And you expect them, but what was the most unexpected comment?
It's a good question. Probably the most, I guess the most insightful piece, but I think I expected it, was just how much consumers, particularly shopping that category, care about health and how much they wanted a really natural ingredient deck. Because I would say of all the customers I watched in the grocery stores, half of them would turn over the packet, read the ingredient deck, and were making decisions based on what the ingredients were in the products. And I don't think that happens as much in other food categories. It happens a bit, but not as much. In like the health food aisle, it obviously would, the health food category, but it was happening a lot in the meat alternative category. And that was kind of 4 years ago that I was first doing that. So that was a big part of what helped lead me down the path of mushrooms. That's the way I shop. And I could see that lots of other consumers were shopping that same way in the category. So that doesn't quite answer your question because I was hoping for it, but maybe it was a bit unexpected that there were that many people who were shopping that way in that category. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting to hear that, because I think that now more and more we're hearing that people want transparency. And so I think that really supports that thought, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because, there were a lot of these meat alternatives, and when they first came out, and I'm not trying to shame any one of them, there was a lot more filler, right? When they first came out, and without pointing fingers, right? And then as more and more came out, we'd see it sort of pressed people to come out with better and better alternatives. Why? Because they wanted to create something that was better than the other. So they would take out the filler, I think, because they had to prove that this item was better than the next. This is just my observation and what I think. So all of a sudden, we're seeing more and more transparency because people are looking and demanding a better product because, as you're observing, people care what's in these products.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
exactly.
so here you're proving out what I was hypothesizing because
Yep.
we're hearing that people want transparency.
Yep,
And 4 years
exactly.
ago, you started to see that. So maybe people like you that were doing research in this niche were observing that people really did want to see this. And so then later on, we started to see these products come out and people be more transparent about it and create better products without sugars and fillers and all sorts of things. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think
it's an idea, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to still keep in mind, I always have to tell myself to not just think about the way I shop for food, because that segment is definitely building, but it's still not the mass market. Like, you only need to walk into a grocery store and look at the products on special on the aisle ends, and it's, Doritos, Coca-Cola, Oreos, all the kind of really bad, really not good for you things. So the mass consumer isn't thinking the way that you and I do, but definitely that segment is growing, and in certain categories in the grocery store, it has changed and improved. And definitely agree with you. Transparency is a big thing that more consumers are looking for. Maybe hasn't crossed over into the mainstream yet, but hopefully will soon.
Hopefully I think the more education that's out there for the community and the masses, we'll start to see a greater demand for it, more than we even see now, because the more people know, the more people will question.
Exactly. Totally agree.
So what's new and what's next for Fable?
Yeah, so we've recently launched into the United States. So we kind of started out in focusing on Australia, but we've recently launched into the United States. So we're now on the menu at Beatnik in New York City. They're a 10-restaurant vegan chain. We're about to launch into the Butcher's Daughter, into their 3 restaurants in New York City, and we will get into the one on Abbot Kinney in LA soon. Then we're going nationally into STK Steakhouses. We'll have a slider burger patty, Fable slider burger patty going into the menu. That'll be the first vegan item on the menu at STK Steakhouses, so that will be exciting. And then into Kona Grill nationally as well. And then we've been partnering with Whole Foods to develop a burrito, which will be going in under one of their private labels into their ready-to-eat section. And all of those launches are happening before the end of January, which is exciting.
Well done. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Awesome.
And then we're also so we mostly focus on food service, but then we're also do a little bit in retail. So we're available online in GTFO vegan in the United States.
Well done. Very exciting. You have a lot going on.
Thanks.
Coming up in the first quarter of this year. So that's very exciting news. So I'm super excited. I can't wait to try it. Hopefully I'll be at STK or the Butcher's Daughter, depending on which coast I'm in or where I am at any given moment. But that sounds amazing. And your story is just inspiring. And I'm so glad that we were able to have you on to share what you've done and what you're doing and where you guys are headed. Are there any new SKUs that you guys, or new products that you're going to be putting together in the second, third, or fourth quarter of this year, or down the road?
Yeah, so we've been working. So we've got the pulled meat product. We've got the slider patty. We'll launch a full-size burger patty later this year in the United States. And then we've also done a meatball, a breakfast sausage patty, and a riblet. So we will hopefully get some more of those SKUs into the market later on in 2023. Yeah, we're excited.
Awesome. Okay, well, we were going to stay tuned, and we're going to have you back so we can keep up to date on what's going on at Fable and where everyone can taste and try your products, whether it's retail or in the restaurants.
Thanks, Justine. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So happy to have you on here, and we look forward to continuing your journey with you and following along. So thank you guys for tuning in to Essential Ingredients, and we'll see you again soon. To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose, and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.